Welcome, everybody. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Sarah and I'm the National Strategy Manager for Volunteering Australia. I'm thrilled to be presenting this webinar for you all today. So just before I introduce Sue, I want to introduce the National Strategy for anyone who may be joining us for a webinar for the first time. So first of all, what is the National Strategy? The National Strategy is a 10-year blueprint and a national strategic framework. It provides a clear and compelling case for change to achieve a better future for volunteering, underpinned by robust data and evidence. Its vision is to make volunteering the heart of Australian communities. The National Strategy was released in early 2023 after a comprehensive consultation process with representatives from all different parts of the volunteering ecosystem. Thousands of stakeholders participated in online consultations, interviews, participatory design workshops, working groups, surveys, and a bespoke research project to build the National Strategy for Volunteering. The culmination of this process identified a unifying vision, 3 focus areas and aims, and 11 strategic objectives. So next slide, Rachel. So in August 2024, Volunteering Australia released the Action Plan 2024 to 2027, which highlighted 22 actions that have been committed to by the volunteering ecosystem to drive us towards the vision in the strategy. These actions include commitments from 5 federal government departments and agencies, 7 state and territory volunteering peak bodies, the National Strategy for Volunteering Research Working Group, Volunteering Australia, and Justice Connect. The actions are a mix of new and aligned strategies that are designed to build momentum towards the strategic goals over the next 3 years. So today's webinar is focused on and driven by Action 8, a commitment to make research about the sector more accessible. Because of this, I'm thrilled to introduce Sue Woodward, the ACNC Commissioner, to talk to you about the Charity by Numbers report and data that is produced with ACNC data. Though there's a lot I can say about Sue, I'll keep it short to maximise her time. But suffice to say, Sue has been flying the flag for the volunteering sector for a very long time. She started her current role as the Commissioner of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission in December 2022. Previously, she was Chief Advisor for the Not-for-Profit Law Service of Justice Connect, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And in 2021, Sue was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia for significant service to the not-for-profit sector. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you now, Sue.
Thanks, Sarah. It's lovely to be here. As you say, my heart has been in the volunteering sector in a variety of forms, including as a volunteer, now as a regulator that cares deeply about the health of the sector, which relies on volunteers. But I too would like to begin by acknowledging the country on which I'm on. I'm on Wurundjeri land in Naarm, as you say, and I pay my respects to Elders past and present and to any First Nations people on the call today. And thank you for your custodianship of this beautiful land. I'm sure the people on this call live and breathe the benefits of volunteering, both in terms of the impact that people create from volunteering and also the benefits people enjoy from volunteering. And I'm hoping that what I can give you today is some practical information and where you can find data and information that can support your work in various ways. The next slide is, sorry, if you'll bear with me, it's a little bit of a fangirl moment because I was recently had the privilege and difficult task of being a judge on the National Volunteering Awards. So these were some quick selfies I got with the people who are the real heroes. Some of the award winners, not all of them, but some of them that I had a chance to personally thank. And that did make me reflect about the volunteering that I've done in my life and what a difference it's personally made for me. As a uni student, as a law student, I volunteered in a community legal centre, and I very much learnt that you know, what I was learning at law school was not necessarily the same as what justice meant. So that has stayed with me ever since. When I had young children, I was on, school councils and various other community groups. And I've also been a volunteer board member on a range of organisations, from very small startups to, a national well-established mental health charity. And I've certainly can honestly say that my life is greatly enriched by the volunteering I've been able to do. And I do believe that it has made me a hopefully more compassionate and more tolerant person. And it has, I think, also enriched my ability to do the job I now have, regulating about 65,000 charities across Australia. So it is a very valuable and a privilege to be a volunteer, I think. What I want to share with you today is some of the data from the ACNC, and particularly there, I just thought I'd give you the overall picture, because our data is one part of that data picture. So every year we produce what we call the Australian Charities Report. We've been doing that for 14 years. This is the 12th edition of the current type of report. And we did do a more detailed report last year, which honed in on volunteering, which I'll also draw on today when I give you some information. But today I really wanted to put this in the context of other data, because sometimes it can get a bit confusing as to where the numbers are coming from and what they're measuring. So it's pleasing now that we also have the ABS data from the General Social Survey, and that has some really rich information about volunteering as well. And I really want to give a shout out to the volunteering peak bodies. I've really enjoyed my working relationship over decades, really, with all the peak bodies, and great that there's a landing page there with all the various reports from individual state peak bodies about the volunteering sector in their own jurisdiction. And the tip I would give you there is that when we talk about the data, sometimes it's worth making sure you know about the source, because that helps you understand why there's different figures about total volunteering numbers. So what has the ACNC done? Well, every year registered charities file an annual information statement, and we, in honouring that, instead of the sector always putting data into government and wondering where it goes, we've tried very much to make sure that we collate that data, we analyse it, we promote it, and we give you access to it so that you can use it for your own purposes. That's the front cover of our most recent Charities report, which was only released a couple of weeks ago. So this webinar, thank you, Sarah, is very timely. And as I say, our data is part of the bigger picture. So what did the latest report show? This is just a few slides that give you some of the snapshot. I really like that first box in the left-hand facing side, where it says that this is the data from 93.2% of charities in that reporting period. So that's a really fantastic reporting rate. Our challenge is to make sure that more people report on time. So a bit of a plug for that. If you haven't done your annual information statement, it might even be due today on the 30th of June. So please know that it's really appreciated if you can do that on time. It also shows that high-level sector-wide information. So obviously, where are charities located? And now this won't be the only places they operate in, but it does tell you where they tell us their main address for service or their main operation is. The most common types of activity, religion and faith-based, is still the largest percentage, closely followed by human services and also education. When it comes to the beneficiaries, so the image, the right-hand facing image, we did see a change here this time. For the first time since we've been doing this reporting, adults over the age of 65 have come into that top 3 group, which is also interesting because it goes to reflects the ABS data that tells us that Australia's population is ageing. So that's where seeing our data follow other trends is I think quite a useful thing for people to have. Thanks. Okay, this is one to give you the background about the financial resources that the sector relies on. So here you can see that government funding is a major source of income, revenue source for some charities. And I'll explain, of course, that's not for all charities. Not all charities receive government funding, and I'm sure many of you would probably like that to be the case, that you could access it, but it is a significant part of the total revenue figure. Donations and bequests play their part. You can see there that nearly 35% of charity revenue comes from goods and services, so essentially income that the charities are earning themselves. When it comes to the left-hand side and the right-hand side, what it shows is that this year annual revenue grew by 7.5%, so there was considerable growth in the revenue for the sector, taking it to that 17 billion figure, but unfortunately expenses did outstrip the revenue, which we, when we've been doing media around the report, we talked about the sort of cost of living squeeze for the sector. So not only are people that are needing the support of charities, is there greater demand from people needing that help, but for charities themselves, they're in a situation where even though if their revenue is growing, it's not growing at the same pace as expenses. And that's really puts many charities under a lot of pressure. Now, the next one is the paid workforce. So, and also the overlay of charity size. Now, you've always got to have your fun barbecue fact. Mine is that people don't realise how many people are employed in the charity sector. So 11% of Australia's workforce are employed in registered charities, which is really significant. It's more than construction industry, the retail industry, and the manufacturing industry. And I think that's a really significant economic piece of information that often is not understood. And we will talk about the volunteers next, but I think that's shows that when revenue comes in, it often goes to the people power to deliver the services. And the other slide there about charity size is really important too, because the majority of registered charities are small. And that's something that we very much keep in mind. But it is a bit of a tale of two ends, like very small organisations. If 30% of all registered charities have less than $50,000 in annual revenue, that's tiny. And yet at the other end, there are some that are global charities that have annual revenue of 100 million or more. So there's a really big breadth in terms of size in the sector. Now, the next slide is really perhaps the key stats for you as those involved in volunteer involving organisations. Perhaps starting at the top right facing, nearly 4 million volunteers were reported by registered charities. And that was an increase over the previous period and the highest ever recorded volunteer count that we have. So certainly a rebound post-COVID. And in terms of people, that's 172,000 extra since the last report. A really huge piece of information is the middle box, which talks about 53% of charities operated with no paid staff. And this is something that I repeat wherever I go. All the ACNC staff know off the top of their head, because it really tells us a lot about the people that we're trying to support and regulate. And it's a consistent trend. Over the last 14 years that we've been collecting and reporting back this data, it's always been that about half of all charities are entirely volunteer run. And when we do the maths, when we do the rough division, it means that for every person employed, there's approximately 2.5. I know people don't come in half sizes, but they're just in terms of the numbers, there's about 2.5 volunteers for every employee. So when you combine that story of, 11% of the Australian workforce being paid workforce being in registered charities, and you add in the volunteer numbers and contribution, you can see that the charity sector is really people powered, and how significant the volunteer contribution is. It really amplifies the paid staff contribution. And I go back to that middle bit, which is 53% of all charities operate with no paid staff. It's very, very significant. Thanks, Rachel. And just still on this point of volunteers and employees, the volunteer numbers, that was an increase of 4.6%, which is actually more growth than the Australian population figure of the ABS report, that the Australian population has increased at around 1.5%, so 1.5%, and yet the volunteer numbers are at 4.6%. And again, the growth in volunteers was greater than the growth in employees, which is very a relief, given that I've also said that there's that squeeze between many people volunteer for more than one charity sometimes. So that can mean that what we're reporting is not the individual number of volunteers, but the number of volunteers in total that each organisation reported to us. So that's what this slide explains. And it's sort of more like volunteering episodes in a way, rather than the actual number of individual people. And I will say, when you look at the ABS data, it has a much higher figure. It talks about 9.5 million people volunteering rather than 3.9. And the reason for that is the ABS data covers a whole lot of informal volunteering, and it also covers the not-for-profit sector more broadly. So you may know that every registered charity has to operate on a not-for-profit basis, but not every not-for-profit is a registered charity. So charities are like a small subset of the bigger sector. One hopefully easy example is community sporting clubs are typically not registered charities, but they are not-for-profits, and that's often a really big area where people volunteer. They volunteer for their kids' sporting club or their own sporting club. So I just wanted to clarify that, because, as I say, I think it's good to understand. If you can take away a couple of points from today, one of them is understanding what the different reports cover off, and then you'll know how to use the data better. Next slide is really to draw on the other deeper dive report that we did last year that was specifically on volunteering. So it's got a couple of pullouts that I thought I'd mention in the next slide, just to drill down a bit more about what our data shows about volunteering. So here you can see that when you get to volunteer-run charities, the number of volunteers is an average of 26, so quite a significant number. When you get to the types of organisations that engage volunteers, the arts and animal welfare do feature more prominently than they do for organisations that are not volunteer run. So that's I don't know if that rings true for people on this call today, but it did show up in our data. you can also see that often volunteer-run organisations are really small, that their annual revenue is significantly less than those that are not volunteer-run. But a lot of small organisations add up to a big impact in terms of their economic contribution, and that is this figure would have grown from this report from last year. So they generated $4.3 billion in revenue. And as I say, that was from last year's figures. So if we allow for the sort of increase in numbers this year, that figure would be even greater. But it does show the economic impact, and I don't ever want to diminish that it's just about the dollars and the numbers, but I think sometimes you get people's attention when you can show that it really adds up and it is a significant economic force. This also draws out a fact that might ring true for many of you, that volunteer-run charities rely much more heavily on donations and bequests than do the non-volunteer-run charities. And that can also be relevant to where they need to put their efforts and how hard it is to maintain income to run their activities. A figure that's not up there, but it did show up in that report, is a lot more of volunteer-run charities are incorporated associations. So in terms of legal structure, the most common was to be an incorporated association. And this is relevant for the ACNC because we now have the regulators from each state and territory that govern incorporated associations on our advisory board. So we're always working with them to try and find ways to streamline reporting to support organisations that are often very, very small. The next couple of slides are really just, these were case studies that we put in the volunteering effect report that we did last year. I love this group. They are one of the longest running volunteer women-led organisations in Australia, and they have been providing support to a whole range of people who whether they be local students who need to engage in public speaking. They've helped Aboriginal tertiary students gain qualifications, and they've supported a whole range of students experiencing disadvantage. So really great to use them as a spotlight case study. And then the next one is the case study of Clean Up Australia. And even though they do have a few paid staff, we did want to highlight them in our last report because such an amazing story over so many years. You know, I'm relatively old and I still remember all the, you know, big Clean Up Australia movement. And when you can tell the story of the contribution of volunteers at such a level over so many years, it's really pretty amazing. And then I just wanted to make sure we had a slide, which I'll be really interested to get your feedback on and any questions on, and any you know, further reflections you have. But some of the challenges that we hear from volunteer-run groups is, again, you know, how heavily you have to rely on donations and bequests, and they, you know, you might have annual fundraising events and you fairly reliably get a certain amount of money, but when there's a cost of living crisis for people who might normally donate and they donate either a smaller amount or not able to donate at all, I know that that can make it hard even to plan what work you can do because you don't really know ahead of time what you can rely on. And again, that much smaller percentage of volunteer-run groups get revenue from government. The overall statistic for the sector is that 49% of all income from the sector of registered charities comes from government, and yet that trickles down not in the same way, doesn't translate through to volunteer-run groups in the same way. I have written far too many grant applications in my life, and it's something in my current job, even though I do have to be very concerned about our budget and how we might apply to get more funding for the ACNC, it's not the same as having to write grant applications. And I really know that that takes time and is often very grueling. And sometimes it may be difficult to find people who can support organisations to do that sort of work. And I also know that it may be that for many volunteer-run groups, small organisations, you might not have deductible gift recipient status, which can also narrow the field when it comes to where you can get those donations and grant funding from. So I think that combination does make it pretty tough sometimes for many of the groups that are smaller and volunteer-run. But we know that volunteer-run groups do amazing work, and larger organisations that also rely on volunteers can't do the work that they do without that engine room of the volunteer workforce. And then I think the next slide is really just to encourage you that we've tried to make it, I promise, as easy as possible. You do not have to have any qualification at all. We have a 3-minute video on our website that shows you step by step of how to access the data that's on our charity data hub. And you can easily filter by which state you're in or which geographical area, what type of work you do. And it might, I hope, let you use data to help tell the story of the impact that you're having. And one way you might want to do it is use some of the high level data that's in our reports about the size of the sector and, you know, some of the beneficiary groups and the revenue and things like that. And then to help tell your particular story, your charity or your part of the sector, you can do that deeper dive into the actual data and filter it in different ways. And then you can quote the data as an authoritative source, which I think hopefully strengthens the case for advocacy that you're doing and for any funding applications you're doing or for any reporting you're doing and for explaining to people why your charity has the impact that it does. And the last slide is really just how to keep in touch with us. We do have a monthly newsletter. People tell me that, well, it seems to get quite good open rates, as they say. So hopefully that's something useful. But also we've got a really comprehensive website with resources to support you in your work. And then, Sarah, I think I'll leave it there. And I think we've still got plenty of time for some questions.
So thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate that comprehensive explanation, and thank you so much for singing out the Charity Data Hub and particularly that 3-minute explainer, because I think it, you know, such a useful tool for organisations who are really wanting to take baby steps. And once Sue has departed, I have a few suggestions for anyone who is wanting to dabble in data but is maybe feeling a little intimidated by that. So hopefully, you know, Sue's passion is run through, but her clear explanation of both where the data is coming from and what sort of challenges and opportunities, you know, the team at the ACNC are able to see through that. Now, it appears we may have had a slight technical glitch, so I'm going to be just giving you a few questions, if that's okay, Sue. And so the first, obviously, it was so wonderful that you pulled out all of that information. First of all, I love that statistic, around 11% of the Australian workforce is employed in charities. I'm going to use that, but so interesting, you know, some of the challenges that you pulled through on that last slide also. So I guess I love to give the power back to you. And first of all, if there are 1 or 2 changes, if you could wave a magic wand and fix 1 or 2 things, what would be your wish list, or what would you wish that, you know, I guess individuals from volunteer involving organisations could have at their disposal. Maybe it is an unlimited access to different data. Maybe it is an automated grant writer. I certainly know I would love that. Take it away. But yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't presume to know what might work best for any individual organisation. I suppose when I've been a volunteer board member, perhaps I can draw back on that. I think something that was always challenging, particularly in a startup situation, was the uncertainty about the funding. So if you get, the funding that came with a longer time frame was helpful, because it wasn't like, oh, it's for 12 months and then by the time you get the project going and maybe you have enough funding to employ one person to support the project, and then all of a sudden it's, well, is that going to continue, and that person's thinking of getting another job. So I do think, and I think there have been some moves from some funding sources to support organisations, understanding that sometimes real change takes a longer period of time. I think that's probably something from my own experience that would have been really helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I certainly was fascinated to learn how much of the volunteer effort goes and how much of the sort of charity sector funding, particularly for those small organizations, is reliant on donations and bequests. And I think anyone who's listening from a volunteering perspective, who's potentially been involved in any, bake sales or charity, initiatives, we know the type of people power that some of those fundraising efforts can really draw, and how much volunteer legwork that is on the ground. There has been one question that's come through, but just I guess what if any key messages are there to the government from the ACNC on the back of the Charity by Numbers report? You obviously pulled together a more condensed version focused on those smaller volunteer groups. So what was, I guess, driving that, and any key messages that you wanted distilled out and repeated back to the audience today?
The most recent Charities report, the key messages that we put out in our media release, all that information, of course, is on our website, was exactly that point around the cost of living crunch in a way. And when I've done media around the report, that's really been the point that the media have been interested in. That, again, this year the data showed that revenue increase. That sounds like a great story, and it's certainly better than it going backwards, and it is increasing at quite a strong rate. But what's the impact of that increase if you expenses are outstripping that? And then also when you're facing, for some, not every charity and not all across the entire sector, but many charities are also publicly reporting the demand is growing for their needs, and yet the cost of running an organisation, insurance, wages, fuel bills are increasing. So it's not like for business that you can put up prices. Increased demand usually means, oh, that's great, we can put our prices up. I'm constantly trying to explain that it's not the same, and it's much more challenging for charities in that situation. So that was a key point, I think, that was made this time.
No, that's wonderful. And, again, it feels sometimes like our media attention has a very short lifespan at this moment in time. It's hard to remember what happened in January or February, but certainly those cost of living pressures are very, very present. And the response that you can have as a charity is, very, very different. Yeah, I think from that perspective, you've, we might leave things there, and just thank you so much for your time today. And those resources, those links, we'll make sure they're sent out with the recording of today's session. And again, really, I hope that if you can take any message from Sue's presentation today, that understanding the data landscape is very important, and that there are ways, the ACNC has a lot of resources available through particularly that data hub, to try and make it easier for you to include and utilize data in your work as VIOs, and I guess fit your challenges, your opportunities, and your how you achieve your vision, purpose, achieve your operations, including with volunteers, how you fit into the larger context. And, the ACNC's data is a really, really crucial way that we're able to understand what the picture is like, particularly for volunteer involving organisations, obviously noting the distinctions that Sue herself has raised around, registered charities and, the groups that covers and doesn't cover. So thank you again for your time today, Sue. We really appreciate, and we'll leave things there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining the call today. I know you're all very busy, and I hope that that's been really at least some help to you in your work. Many thanks. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.